music administrators, music supervisors. Viva to the music people. Welcome everybody to this amazing panel that is hosted by the Music Publishers Association of South Africa, MPASA for short. My name is Thando and I'm the operations manager at the company. If you guys would like to know more about us, please find us at MZ04. Am I correct, Gallo? We are all the way on the right side in the main stage. And you'll also find a host of many other really, really great publishers there. So if you want to find more information on what the MPA does, if you guys want to interact with some of the music publishers, please come through and visit us. We have an amazing panel today of experts. And I would like to give it up to our panel facilitator, Rob Cowling, who is the GM of Gallo and also a board member of the MPA. I think it's very, very important to create a space and really talk about music licensing, because music is a very important part of the production process, right? And we cannot take the topic of music outside of pre-production, production, and post-production, yes? So we want to really just hone into important information on the processes of music licensing, issues, good things, bad things. So thank you so much for taking your time and paying your attention to us. I'm going to give it up to Rob. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. I think, can you hear me? Am I mic'd up well? Thanks. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to be here in Cape Town. Thanks for the weather. Yeah, very interesting panel we have today. It's, I came to this same event last year, and interesting to see a lot of animators and film producers and agencies and that kind of thing. But music synchronization is often an afterthought, and us as publishers and content creators and content owners, we like to give a bit more of an explanation on what music publishing and record label rights are in terms of synchronization. Sync, or synchronization as it's called, doesn't really have a legal definition in terms of the Copyright Act, but it's essentially content owners and creators in the form of record labels more often and music publishers who own content, and they couple that content with moving pictures, film, TV series, radio, online streaming, and advertising. So we're here to talk about the ins and outs of that, the rights issues that are involved, the philosophy behind it, and often creators who are looking for a publisher often think that sync is like the holy grail. Well, it is, because often you can handle a huge catalog, but you can have something that gets placed into a big advert or into a film, and just from that one placement you can make a lot of money. The difference is there's so much content out there. There are a lot of publishers, there are a lot of film companies, and a lot of care and attention needs to go into kind of thinking about what those agencies are doing, what brands they represent. Don't pitch a Matthew Mole song to an Awisa brand. Don't pitch a song to a film just through spam. If you don't know what the agency is doing, if you don't know what the film company, what the production company is working on, do your research, because more often than not it's about relationships and a little bit more of a broader knowledge than just thinking a publisher can just spam music out and somebody's going to pick yours out of a drop in the ocean. Anyway, I'm going to invite the panel up. I'm not going to do intros for each one. I'm going to let each one intro themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are. So you can all just come up, guys, please. I guess we can start with the ladies. Or from the left, yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Thembi and I work at Empire as Director for Partnerships and Synchronization. My background is in the music industry has been around legal and then later very much into synchronization. So from clearance and placement and actively seeking for sync. Yeah, that's me.
Hi everybody, I'm Marc Algranti. I'm a music supervisor and I guess a creative producer. I kind of help people find music for adverts, movies, whatever it might be, and I work very closely with the content owners, the publishers, the record labels, and that type of thing, and I'm kind of, I search for music all day.
Morning everyone, my name is Thando Makhunga. I'm the Managing Director of Sheer Publishing. Obviously as a publisher that also owns a lot of catalog, particularly African catalog, we do a lot of sync work with pretty much everyone on this panel actually. And I think what I'm excited to chat about today is just hopefully providing some solutions for filmmakers, directors around how easy it can be to license music correctly. And obviously I think you'll also chat a little bit about when you don't do that. So yeah, thank you.
Hey, I'm Rob Brinkworth. I've got a company, Resonate, and we do a lot of different types of IP, from composing to generating software, all related in sound. And yeah, I'm one of their clients. And a lot of the work I do centers around films and commercials. And yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'm at.
Cool. So yeah, since we're here to kind of help the audience understand more about harnessing the power of music through storytelling and brand promotion, I'll start on my left. Rob, is music production just for background or to set the scene, or do you feel that as the composer and studio guy here that there's basically like a way that music is or has a higher power in terms of telling the story, and is there something that you've worked on that you can use it as an example?
Sure, it's a big question.
Where music has made the difference.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
Look, music is the language of emotion, and it is probably one of the most powerful forces in storytelling. I think Marc mentioned, he spends his day finding music for things, and it takes very great teams of people to make good stories in film. I think down to having a great director and editor, I think selecting music to be sunk is it's such an important process. So it really does make a massive difference in having a broader knowledge of music. But beside that, one needs to really understand the story that we're trying to tell. And I think that it's such an important part of the process that it's often left right to the end of the process. So each brief we would deal with, for instance, will have a very nuanced set of parameters and things we're trying to meet. Like you were saying now, you need to have a very broad picture of the product you're trying to make and the client you're trying to talk to, what you're trying to say. If we're working in a museum environment, are we trying to tell a story that's different to what's necessarily on the outset, what you would be trying to think of saying. So yeah, I think it's a very important part. Like a lot of people in my industry say, like sound is 50% of a production. I sometimes think that it's more than 50%. So yeah, it's a massive part of.
So I've been doing this for a while. I've never really heard that when music is sunk. Like I've always like, okay, that just doesn't really sound right. But do you have like an example maybe of something where like you've been looking for something, you've placed something in an ad or produced something, and it's like the song has just made all the difference?
Yeah, you know, we go down this journey often with directors where, you know, we'll search and search, and your initial idea, it sticks, but it just doesn't click yet. And you know, I've been down roads with this where we'll throw hundreds of tracks at a visual, and sometimes just the you know, there's no way to you can't short circuit the creative process. So the way I always work is to take these ideas and build on them and build on them. There are many examples. I don't know, Marc had a piece you guys were going to play for everyone?
Yeah, so I think maybe that's a good segue in terms of mentioning going through hundreds of tracks. So when Eddie presented yesterday for Music Info Africa, or Music in Africa, he mentioned that there were 100,000 songs going up on streaming platforms every year. So that's over 36 million songs a year. That's just on streaming platforms. You know, so there's kind of like, as for Marc, as a music supervisor, then I mean, where do you even start? How do you know where to pick, and like you know, any tips or examples on where you even start?
So yeah, I guess, you know, I just have a passion for listening to music, and I listen to a lot of music all the time. I work with people, you know, from the big labels, big publishers, to these little indie publishers overseas or locally, and so I'm, you know, I have good relationships with a lot of people that have the content, and a lot of the time I lean on them as well, and say to them, I've got this brief, can you know, maybe pull some stuff out of your catalog for me? It'd be impossible for me to find all the music myself, so I do a lot of that. Also, just having done this for so long, I have a huge, I guess, bank of tracks that I've gone through already in the past, and often the briefs are quite similar. You know, it'll be, we need a song about somebody breaking through to the next level, or we need a song about somebody who's, you know, rags to riches story, or whatever it might be, and those kind of briefs come up a lot, and so then I can go back to those songs again and use those as inspiration. But it is definitely a collaboration with, you know, publishers, labels, artist managers, whatever it might be, who I will often get hold of and say, you know, I've got this brief or whatever, as well as my own knowledge. It's just impossible to keep up with the amount of music that's being released at the moment. And, you know, sometimes something just completely obscure and odd will just end up on the picture. They just can't imagine that it would have happened. A small artist with maybe, just recently I did a campaign for the US where one of the songs that I found for them had only like 4,000 Spotify plays. So, you know, it's great if you can find something like that, that's like a little nugget that hasn't been discovered yet. Fantastic. You know, it's so much easier when I get a brief that says, we're looking for a big hip hop track for our summer campaign. You know, that's easy because, you know, you could just look at the top 100 hip hop hits of the year or whatever it is. Whereas when you get into like either budget constraint where there's, you know, it's a small production and they don't have money for a big track, or they want something really unusual, obscure, interesting, that gets more exciting, and also gives opportunity to a smaller artist to show their stuff.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, maybe that's one of the huge benefits of Sync, is that you can find this like hidden gem that suddenly blows up and breaks out, you know. I mean, okay, the Kate Bush example is overused, and it's like that's an existing song, but that was re-earthed, but that kind of thing. And I guess maybe something important for the audience to know, or the creators, is like, as a music supervisor, you need to be unbiased, right? You can't. It's about the song. It's about the fit in the story. It's about what it's going to add in terms of value, etc. So tell us a bit about that in terms of like. There's obviously relationship building, and there's trust. So you need to know what the supervisor's working on, etc. But yeah, just elaborate a little bit on that.
So as I was saying earlier, I'm completely agnostic when it comes to where I get my music from. So I don't have any I have close relationships, but none of them are going to take precedence over another. If the song's right, the song's right. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. And it's the relationships are there because when I can trust people to send me the right music. I can trust people to help me get clearances on the music as well. That's a big part. Sometimes I'll find a track, but it's almost impossible to get it approved or cleared. I did something recently with a little Italo disco track, and the guy I was dealing with was still printing and pressing vinyl, but shipping it from his house in Italy or whatever. And he just said to me, no, I own the track, and I couldn't get any further information, so I had to just drop that right there and then because I knew there could be trouble later. So what's really important, the trust factor, as you said, is super important because I need to trust who I'm dealing with, because I don't want to be, and it's happened before where there's a situation where a new a sample wasn't cleared or something like that, and then there's trouble later. Hasn't happened to me, thank goodness, but I've seen cases where somebody's licensed a track and didn't realize there was a sample in it, or went to a publisher that wasn't really, a reputable publisher. So that's where the relationships come in. More than also on the creative side, but definitely on the administration side. That's super important to get that right, because that can really turn the whole process around and end up with legal battles and all that kind of thing. It's the last thing you want.
So being a Rugby World Cup here, I believe you worked on something recently with MTN and the Springboks.
So we took what I guess the public domain song, a traditional song, and the Guijo squad re-recorded this for us for a beautiful MTN campaign, and it's just so moving. It was just absolutely right for this campaign. The music that they used for this, and just the recording of it was amazing. You'll see it now, hopefully, and then there's a version where there's a deaf choir, so they're signing it as well. So it was just a all-round beautiful project with very powerful music and totally relevant for now because of the World Cup. So
amazing. Yeah, I think we've got that here, right? Can we put that on?
Two. Tinasia zalana mama.
Just a quick point about this was a very close collaboration between the director, the Guijo squad, myself, and studios and stuff, because there's so many different parts to that song. It goes from a big choir to a small choir to somebody humming it. So it was a fantastic back and forth collaboration. So there's a lot of that happens as well. It's not just about finding the song. It's how do you make it work in the picture? Do you need to re-record it? Do you need to change it? All that type of thing as well.
So I think the beauty of that, so inspirational. Got goosebumps there, but just like to have a local brand, local producer, local music. So I guess maybe for Thando, in terms of an African publisher, are we seeing enough business in Africa from a sync perspective? Is there room for growth? And if not, what's holding us back?
So I think we are definitely seeing a lot of business. Obviously, South Africa is a far more mature market, and you have the likes of Marc being very active in that space. I always think about one of our top syncs at Sheer is actually the Checkers 6060 ad, which is a Mandoza track. And I think that campaign has been running for over 4 years. So there's definitely opportunity and value there. another perfect example is Shaga Ilembe, which is also a phenomenal project that was done by Philip Miller, who did the score on that, very African sounds, but it's obviously always driven by demand. So if filmmakers are writing original African stories and wanting sounds that speak to that, then we'll obviously have those works. So what we do see, though, particularly in the rest of the continent, is I think just because of the way in which copyright laws are set up in particular markets, it's quite, challenging for creators to be able to get, some of the big budgets and the big campaigns for music particularly. So we'll see instances where possibly a creator is being bullied really into doing an entire film score for a once-off fee, signing over all of their rights to the producers. And as a publisher, obviously, we just get very upset when we hear stories like this. But it's also driven by either a lack of knowledge, so in terms of what can I own, and the value of the music that the person is creating. I think there's a very low value of music content in film in some markets. So it's always the very last thing that we think about. And we always, try to encourage filmmakers and producers to always think about, what is the story that I'm telling? I need to have a budget for actors. I need to have a budget for the, set or whatever the case might be. And I need to have a budget for music, a proper budget for music. And I think these are the challenges that we're seeing in the rest of the continent. But from an opportunity point of view, as I said, it literally is driven by demand. And the demand is definitely there. All of the stuff that you guys have seen around Nollywood and, the phenomenal content that's coming out of Nigeria in particular, I think, in my mind, should link directly to better quality of, music composition, sync work for creators in that part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're fortunate because it came up earlier, in terms of the Grammys and Black Panther and that kind of thing. But I've heard similar stories. I think John Carney was saying that, with these big studios like Marvel and that kind of thing, there's no residuals. There's the deals are really hectic, and more often than not, like, music's an afterthought. If you don't get in early, it's like, oh hell, we need some music for this thing. We've got $5, like, what can we get? Great. I mean, I know. I think, Marc, you mentioned remixing and rights and something just now. So I just want to ask Thembi. There was a mention at some point in our discussions off panel about a 20-page contract that came through for a music job in the US, which sounds hell of a complicated. I mean, a 20-page contract for a sync is a lot. I mean, ours are not even half of that. Can you break it down for us from when a producer, a supervisor has selected the music, where to from there in terms of the legal side and the contractual side?
Yeah, I mean, in the most simplified way, really, is that you first have to be clear. Two things have to happen here. There has to be an understanding that there are two sets of rights being cleared. And followed by that is that the understanding that music clearance has to be done well in advance. I think all of us here get last-minute requests, and it compromises the rights holders or the people where the rights are sitting with the custodians or licensees. So those are the first two things, right? And then it just gets slightly simple in that once you understand that at the back of your mind, it allows you to go and seek as much information as you can about that work, about the music, and the owners. And from there, you start to move to engage the master rights holders and the publishing rights holders. Those things are the basic. Everything else after that becomes a negotiation of term, fee, geogating, all of the stuff that goes with sync. But I think the most important thing to note every time is to make sure that you have an understanding of those two things, that you must seek to clear well in advance, and that there are two sets of rights to be cleared. Those are the first two things. Of course, territories are different. Yes, our own sync agreements aren't that lengthy, right? And we try and be as simplistic while still mitigating risk, and securing our own rights, especially the rights holders, and ultimately the artist's rights, or the publisher, the writer's rights. So I guess I found that it's become a regional thing, and also depending on the platform. So we know
Yeah.
with the advent of streaming platforms that we've seen different types of agreements. When you look at one, you'll say, okay, this is a standard Netflix agreement. But right at the end is negotiation, like I said. And I think those are the things that should not deter us because we see a long contract. It shouldn't deter us. We should make sure that it captures the essence of the deal and the spirit of why we are contracting as parties. I don't know if that answers you.
Yeah. I think it's important to note, often a lot of people don't understand what we call in the industry most favored nations and the fact that there's both sides. So what that means is you get a master recording right and you get a music publishing right. The music publishing right might be split between various publishers. The master is usually owned by a record label. If you're charging a certain amount, if there's an agreed amount for the master, generally that same amount would apply. So as a music supervisor, for example, in your budget, if you think you've gone to a publisher and a publisher's cleared something for $5,000, for example, there's actually a second right if you're using the original recording. If you're not using the original recording and doing a cover version, well, then you don't have to pay the label, which is often sometimes in a sync capacity where creators or agencies will actually not clear a master right. They'll rather re-record it because then they can save on part of the cost. I think, also in terms of what you're clearing and if you're doing contracts, to be sure that the person you're contracting with actually has the rights to give. So I've heard of examples where you have managers or artists, for example, who are clearing rights, but actually they don't, or they only own half of those rights, not all of them. Or the song that they're clearing, they actually own the original, they don't own the remix or the version that they're using that contains a sample, so there's a bit of a minefield there. So I think, those sync rights are negotiable, but you could end up in a less desirable deal if you don't understand the rights behind it.
Very important. Just one really important thing is don't rely on the artist manager to give you the rights. I've seen this happen over and over again. They think they own the track or they pretend they own the track. So make sure that you've spoken to each and every publisher. Ask them who's published the track. Go and speak to that person yourself because it's happening over and over again where I've seen something on TV recently where they've licensed a track that is absolutely not licensable because it's got an uncleared sample. And the manager probably just said, no, it's fine, you can have it. So just a word of warning for anybody that's licensing.
Look, there's also some cases where, because the internet by its very nature is kind of user-generated content, where brands sometimes will say, well, TikTok is licensed or Instagram is licensed, so if I just use a song on TikTok or Instagram, except they don't realize that by using the song related to a brand, whether that's a golf course or a spa resort or a whatever, that is actually infringing because it's promoting a brand, so it's actually synchronization. So in terms of the digital age and where we are now, there were some broad media stats that came out that found that 86% of local marketing departments allocate their budget to digital. So for Marc, in terms of music and storytelling, like how has that been playing a role in terms of online brands, and are producers and supervisors equipped for that?
So I think that there's a huge misconception between user-generated content and anything to do with a brand. You can get away with putting a song on a user-generated piece, but as soon as you tie into any kind of brand of any sort, then it becomes a very different license involved. So you have to license that. So it's not, you can't just be a content producer that's asked by a brand, go and make a piece of content for us and mention our name or whatever it might be. As soon as that happens, then there is a cost involved. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more of this happening. People putting stuff up on TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, whatever, without permission. And unfortunately, it's I know that it's difficult for the publishers and for the labels to have to deal with this because they don't want to be pulling stuff down. But as soon as there's a brand attached, just remember that there has to be a license fee involved of some sort, which you can negotiate and do up front. But that's very, very important.
And now that we have all these streaming services like Netflix and Showmax and everybody else, I guess for Thando, if composers are finally getting compensated by these services, I know some are lagging behind, but are we doing enough to make sure that local films and series producers are properly considering our African content on SVOD and streaming platforms?
Absolutely. I think from a share perspective, one of the things that we are very proud of is owning a catalog called the Skumba Music Library, which is very authentic. I mean, we've got hundreds and thousands of pieces of music on that library, and it's very authentic African sounds from across the continent. So we do a lot of work with organizations like the NFVF, doing masterclasses around educating filmmakers and directors around what's available. I know Mama Dance is also here, which has a phenomenal African music content production library as well. Over and above that, it's also about making sure that our composers are profiled in a certain sense, you know. So this is one of the reasons that we've got Rob here, as well as, you know, all of the different composers that we represent. So we have to do a lot of advocacy effectively. The other thing that I think, in as much as obviously our primary market is Africa, there's a huge demand for African content outside of Africa, especially that sort of authentic African sound. So we do a lot of work with our parent company, which is Downtown Music Holdings, just trying to get them to understand that there's more to Africa than Amapiano and Afrobeats.
Yeah, sure.
You know, there's, you know, sounds from East Africa, there are sounds from Central Africa, and they're completely different and can tell a completely different story. So I think as publishers, and I think as a publishing industry and a music industry, there's a lot of work that we need to do to create awareness, so that there's a little bit more understanding about what's available and the value of what's available, because I think it's a very untapped market, particularly when it comes to very African types of sounds.
Yeah, it's strange. You normally find that the kind of US perception of African music is like usually drums and marimbas and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, locally, we've got like all these different languages and all these different genres and everything. So yeah. It's tough.
Yeah.
You mentioned library, so I just want you to touch on the difference between a commercial usage for sync, a library usage for sync, and what we would call a commission usage.
So commercial usage for sync, and I'm going to put it by budget and maybe explain it by budget, because that's always the thing that people want to know. Commercial music is typically always going to be more expensive for any project that you're utilizing. Just because of, if you think about the number of marketing dollars that have gone into that Katy Perry hit, right? Somebody needs to pay it back somehow, and they're going to make it. And obviously, from an impact point of view, your commercial songs generally tend to be for your bigger campaigns. So I would say that that's commercial music from a budget perspective. The license would obviously be for whatever the platform is. Production music is a little bit more affordable. I mean, it could range from TV themes to pretty much any kind of sound that sounds like the scene that you're trying to set. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a production library called Skumba Music, which can include, you know, pretty much any kind of sound that you want, and that's normally governed by a blanket license in South Africa, a little bit more affordable. Commission work is where then you get, you know, customized music created specifically for your project, and this is, you know, where the likes of Rob and you know, that kind of custom work is created specifically for that project. And I think certainly a very underutilized part of you know, the licensing framework for film, because I think people don't realize that you can actually just create exactly what you need for your Maskandi project. There was a lady earlier saying she wanted a Maskandi. Somebody can create that for you, and it's probably a lot more affordable than trying to get a big Maskandi hit licensed. So
yeah, and maybe easier than trying to find something to stick to something where you can actually create it bespoke.
correct, yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, you know, one of the benefits of writing specifically is that it's not always easy to find a track that tells the exact story you're trying to tell, and so there is that blur between finding a sound that fits a film. Maybe it's a certain kind of aesthetic that is specific. A lot of the time these days we see, you know, in commercials, a lot of library music, thanks to Craig and the rest of the people making it. It's also been great for composers as a side stream, but I think creatively there's something about making music specifically for a scene you're trying to a scene or a story you're trying to tell. an example would be I worked with also on one of your clients, Bram de Toy, and we made the soundtrack for Morphe, and that entire process was, you couldn't do a score like that any other way. I think that even down to how we decided to make that piece of art was very custom. The scenes are very specifically laid out. The kinds of musicians we got to use, the chapel we recorded in was contextually very thought about, and so there are all those different categories. So just to add to, it's kind of and it is very much a cost thing, to make a custom piece of music with 30 musicians and sound engineers and the entire process. If it's for a small budget commercial or something and they only have a certain amount of money, and that's happened over the years. We've seen, especially in advertising, how it's gone from big 10 million rand TV ads down to, certainly with digital now, we've got a lot of agencies who are making their ad spend is now mostly online, and so it's just reflecting the marketplace at the end of the day, where they don't have 200,000 rand or 500,000 rand to make a piece of music, and often it's not worth doing that on a lot of ads. So there are all these different categories to play in, and I guess it's so broad, the music spectrum.
I think also with digital, because of the very nature of streaming, the rights usually asked for are worldwide in perpetuity, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but at least you need to know what you're getting into to do that. And I know often that a lot of these streaming services, unless you specifically point it out, will ask for all-inclusive rights. So essentially that means you end up waiving your performance rights and your mechanical rights in the broadcast of it. So just to explain, outside of the synchronization right itself, there's actually still election society. When the product gets broadcast, there's still a mechanical copyright and a performance copyright that goes to the rights holders. Thembi, just to touch on maybe a two-part question in terms of the copyright amendment bill that's coming up, that some of us are fighting hard to protect protect content owner rights, and a lot of the kind of recommendations that look like they might pass into law, in particular one being fair use. Your thoughts on that, and then the second part to that, in terms of the risks of using unlicensed content, what are the costs, the repercussions, and the legal implications or reputational implications of that?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter. Look, copyrights are property rights at their very basis. They're linked to trademark rights, image and likeness, etc. And I think we should also not ever de-link image likeness from sync, because it tends to have an impact on it, right? So if we are to follow the notion of property rights, then we understand that when there's an infringement, there are various legal remedies, right? Whether they're injunctive, whether it's about the destruction of, which in our industry is a takedown. These things will happen. But I think in the age of influences and what's happening on social media, we're finding more and more, at least from case law, even if those cases get settled out of court, but we're seeing that the cases that are hitting the courts in that regard are around personal liability. So even the influencer could be held accountable in their personal liability, even though this was within the scope of their contract with a brand, right? Of course, our courts are not too clear on what the actual stuff is. And so what they tend to use is the umbrella term that, if you have infringed these property rights, copyright, trademark rights, and if there's image and likeness linked to it, there should be a punitive measure taken against you. But of course, one of the challenges is that it is difficult to detect, or actually, maybe not detect, but keep track of the amounts of usages, right? There isn't also a clear legal precedent around who to hold liable, the influencer or the brand, right? Because the influencer essentially would not be the employee of a brand, and so there's no vicarious liability in that instance. So I think it is not clear. There's no clear or exact principle in law right now. I speak from a precedence perspective that sort of sets that says it's A or B. What it does say for sure, these are property rights, and if you infringe them, you will be held liable as the court see fits. That's what we know for a fact. So generally, when people deal with me, or when they used to deal with me in my former life, it would be a takedown notice, right? And that's not so pleasant if something has gone live. So for instance, Marc was speaking to knowing where you're getting your rights from, checking if there was a sample to the initial work that is not getting synced, and if that sample was cleared. When I come in, I know it wasn't cleared. And so I don't think the onus is on me to tell Marc, oh, I'm sorry you didn't know this. I have to protect someone's property rights. And so off the top of my head is a takedown immediately. And that compromises him, the spend and everything. And so these are things that we need to prevent. And that prevention goes back to what I spoke about earlier on, which is get as much information about the song as you can. And then try and know who the rights holders or the custodians of that sound recording are on both sides, on master and on publishing. I'll say this, we speak about re-records a lot. A few years ago, me and a colleague of mine, Mzwa, were fighting. And we were fighting because it was a re-record. And my somewhat legal argument was, but there was reliance on the original master. At least sonically, it sounds that way. So is there no fee, an upliftment fee that I should be getting, considering that there was reliance on the original sound recording? And so you see, there are many blurry lines. I think
legal technicalities, yeah.
Yes. And I was purely thinking from a legal perspective, right? Even though I was a sync practitioner, but I was thinking there seems to be a gap here, and our laws don't make those gaps. It doesn't cover them. I think it is also up to us to set precedents along those things. There isn't a very firm rule book, but we can create one that protects the owners of the intellectual property.
Yeah, and just on the fair use side, I mean, obviously the problem there is if you're up against big companies or big tech, and you're trying to combat something that's been used of yours under the guise of fair use, you've got litigation open to you, but litigation against the big company A, and B, the little guy in US dollars or whatever it is you're not going to fight that fight, right?
Ideally, you shouldn't. Yes, you won't. I actually wrote this one down because Ryan reminded me yesterday. I wrote it down because, again, fair use in our country, in our continent is still murky waters. And I wrote it as my personal view and not what is gospel or what the law says. The protection of property is enshrined in our Constitution. That's number one. And maybe this is where I personally find a clash between fair use and a person's property rights. Now, of course, there's research, and I think it extends to it goes to the extent that if you are the one using this IP, right, without taking it to the marketplace for your own personal uses, that should be considered fair use. But is fair use fair is the bigger question, right? And speaking to those companies that you are referring to. So here's my personal view. The amendment bill has to find balanced ways that will allow and ensure that the copyright creator and the user, particularly the creator, is not prejudiced by the user. Now, that doesn't answer your question. I'm aware. I don't have the answers. But I do think that if we lean solely on fair use as it stands, we run the risk of copyright abuse. We run the risk of undermining the efforts of the owners of copyright, of the creators. And so I think we've had many robust discussions about fair use in many conferences. I think Google also hosted us at some point. It is, I think maybe we should, as people in this region, speak in unison around how does fair use actually affect us, and if there is a bridge between us and the big corporates, because the truth is no one wants to be buried in litigation with a big corporate. It takes resource, and you are one small little man. So I think we need to think around ways of building that bridge so that mostly the risk from our side is mitigated and we are protected, but we are still playing ball with industry, because unfortunately or fortunately, we still need industry even for Sync to thrive.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're out of time. Thanks everybody. Know your rights, know the risks, protection for copyright owners, creators. There's information on the M-Pesa website. There's a stand here as well if you want to pop in, but we can open up the Q&A.
Just 3 more questions. I have the first one here, second one.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for taking your time and coming through and just sharing all your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. I just wanted to ask about interpolations and kind of bringing forth the legacy acts. I think it's Gallo are doing a lot of, Jimmy Nevis did a cover of a couple of classics and things like that. Is that a push to get that music synchronized again? Is that something you guys are excited about? What is the reasoning and thinking behind it? Even the Checkers 6060, it's a clever way of getting that music out there again within your not your library, but within your publishing. Is that something you guys are doing more, getting more artists to do that, or what's the story there?
Well, Gallo specifically, I mean, it's a nearly 100-year-old catalog, so there is a concerted effort to digitize a lot of these old songs, to bring some renewed vigor. Obviously, there's an arts and cultural heritage aspect to it as well, and you're creating new masters, so you're extending longevity, life of copyright. But like Sipho was saying in the panel before, it's also taking music that for somebody who's a Gen Z hasn't even heard that before. They don't know that song existed before. So you've got these remixes and samples that are coming out that are making these historic songs relevant. And it's just modernizing them, So, I don't know if that's...
I could also speak to that a little bit. I do this a lot. There's a lot of remixing, remaking, some with parody lyrics, some without. So, the 6060 is something that I worked on, and it definitely is a way for brands to engage with an audience with a well-known song, but putting their own lyrics in, potentially giving it a more modern feel. I can't tell you how many times I'm getting requests to take an international song and make it an Amapiano song or an Afro House song or something like that. So that's happening a lot as well. I think it just modernizes, brings it to a new audience, and freshens it up, and also gets the brand to a bit of ownership towards that track, because it's now their version versus the original version. So there's a bit of that.
Yeah, so the challenge to you, Majosi, is I think you've got some phenomenal songs that you could also be reworking around opportunities with brands. So I think creators also need to be aware of that opportunity and not sort of think everything is necessarily fixated on broadcast and radio. I think that's definitely a creative opportunity for a lot of artists.
I actually feel strongly about this, and I'm glad Sipho's in the room, and Ryan, because I worked with them a few years ago. I think it's universal in one financial year because of an intended focus on catalog. 60% of our sync revenue came from catalog. And yes, you can augment it so that the brand feels like it's their own, but there's the part where it's used as it is. And that is also profitable, because we all know the good thing about music is that it gives life to whatever you're trying to communicate. And I think for that year, we functioned on nostalgia, you know. We brought, I think we did an MTN campaign with the Jackson 5 song. And so it's possible to sustain synchronization with catalog. I think as a country, we have the luxury of very strong catalog. And I think that's also a thing that we should not neglect when speaking about synchronization.
I think digital in general is like 86% catalog in terms of the numbers. But something interesting as well is if you take a really familiar melody. So I don't know if you know that, I think it's a We Buy Cars ad where they've taken a We Didn't Start the Fire, and it's like we got the car for hire. I mean, you know, that's the job done.
Hello. Thank you very much to the panel. My name is Lance. I'm a songwriter and a producer. My question is for Marc. It's quite a specific one. The MTN advert, was that an existing song that you got recorded with a choir, or was it an existing recording that you synced to the advert?
So it was an existing song. It's a traditional song, and we got the Guijo squad in to re-record it specifically for this commercial. So yeah, so and that happens a lot. We often find existing songs and re-record them locally, mostly locally, which is great. So taking an international song, in this case obviously it's local, but often an international song, recording it locally, so there is local content in it. Yeah, but that was definitely specifically made for this commercial.
Sorry, when you say traditional song, was there a specific author of the song?
So it's basically, it's in the public domain. So there was no publishing that needed to be paid. So there are these, you know, in various countries there's various laws. So in South Africa, it's the publishing law is 50 years after the death of the last composer. Am I correct?
Yeah.
In the UK, it's 70 years. In the US, it's like anything produced before 1923 or so every country has different laws in terms of when things go into the public domain. So this was a traditional song, so there was no copyright issues in terms of licensing for the publishing.
My name is Vugile Moya. I am from Gwalanga in the township Gwalanga. I recently graduated from Bridges Academy. I am a singer and a songwriter. I just want to ask the record labels that how do you find your artists, and you know, how easy is it for artists like me from the township with not much, you know, success and music and all that fame, but has so much gift, has a lot of gift and just beautiful singers. How easy is it for them? What are you guys looking for? Are you looking for talent, or are you looking for, you know, just the product, the full product? Is it easy for you guys to take someone who's raw, someone you see potential, and build them up, or do you need a product that's already done? And then, you know, how do you guys work?
So, yeah, I think record labels are less concerned about composers. So you mentioned labels. We're all publishers, but there's a recording side involved. So I guess it depends on if the label's looking to invest in emerging artists, if they're looking to fund and grow a brand, or if they're looking for somebody who's already got something that they can license that's got a little bit less risk involved. Personally, I think if you want to sign somebody these days, you're looking for somebody that writes their own music. And that could be lyrics, it could be composition, but you want somebody that's like the complete package, because that's a bit more, there's more benefit there, and you could maybe leverage more value by having both sets of rights and opening up revenues on both the recording side and the publishing side. In terms of how labels find artists and stuff, they've got A&R crews, they've got teams that are out there, there's websites, there's info at email addresses and that kind of thing. I'm happy to give you my card after this, and you can, I'll try and hook you up.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to add to that, start where you are. So don't wait for some amazing A&R person to magically discover you. There's so many platforms online, like CD Baby, YouTube. People release music on YouTube, create audiences. So start where you are, because then you'll start to build an audience. Once you have an audience, you'll definitely get the attention of labels.
I've got one case in point. DJ Lag, who's a drum artist, who's, we managed to get one of his songs on a BMW Global commercial. And I mean, it's as edgy as you can get for South African music, and yet it's been played all over the world. So those kind of things, you just got to keep going, and then hopefully just a sync can help a lot. Like you happen to get a sync, and then, the next thing, people know about you all around the world.
Hi, I'm Craig from Mamadon's Music Library. We've been producing music for film and TV for almost 20 years now, and we've seen quite a trend of more and more vocal tracks coming through on the international libraries. And when Marc told the story of how he found a track with 4,000 streams, unknown track, how are you guys? I mean, that track could have been on a library as well. I think there's a lot of young composers, and libraries are just sourcing tracks like that. I'm just wondering, between yourself and Rob, if you are kind of looking at libraries for those vocal tracks. I understand that the big budgets are looking for nostalgia. Essentially, they're paying for nostalgia, which you don't get on the libraries or that 4,000 stream track. So we'll never compete on the nostalgia side, but we can compete on the on just universal lyrics. I'm just curious about your guys' feeling about that.
Sure. Yeah, it's amazing what libraries have these days. Some of the quality of the tracks on library are amazing, and I think it's often the case that I know so many producers who've got a whole hard drive just of amazing tracks that they've made over the years. I think that there's a lot of the times a great vocal is not great because it's great, if that makes sense. It's about the brand they've built as an artist, and I totally agree. I think there is that nostalgia about music, but often brands are also looking at the profile of a track in terms of giving it that weight to a campaign that they're trying to do. So there is that middle ground, but I mean, over the years I've been hearing better and better offerings on library. There is a lot of great, and the market is almost flooded these days, and I've seen it in your guys' market, for instance. In the early days it was license deals, and now I'm seeing libraries that do subscription deals, and they are in perpetuity, use it however you want, just subscribe, use as many tracks as you like. So a very difficult place. So, as someone who produces music, it's obviously, it's an interesting playing field to look at library. But yeah, the quality and the back catalog stuff that's ending up on library too is just phenomenal. Classical works, really well produced, jazz and rock productions. So I think what the composers have done is they've obviously seen it as a new avenue for generating money. I think as the record industry's changed and the sort of decline of people going and buying CDs, they've had to shift their focus into different ways of generating an income. And I think it's just those same artists are now writing for libraries too, and really top quality. Yeah, I mean,
good stuff out there everywhere. Yeah.
I think that, especially because this is a film conference, is that there's space for library composition and licensed music in films, TV shows, and all that type of stuff. So I think they all fulfill a role based on budget, based on need. So I think that there's definitely space for everybody.
Cool. Was that the last question?
Yes, we are actually done.
Yeah, okay.
Let's quickly give it up to our panel, everybody. Amazing, amazing stuff. We are actually leaking into the next panel, which is Harmonizing Diversity. But for any other questions that you guys have, please feel free to engage. There are no gatekeepers here, so do not be shy. Talk, ask, engage.
Yeah, thanks very much to my fellow panelists, and I hope you all leave here with a sinking feeling.